this particular roundtable discussion. This roundtable discussion by the Committee on the Guam U.S. Military Relocation and Public Safety and Judiciary is hereby convened. The purpose for this particular roundtable discussion was highlighted in the letter of communication that was forwarded to all of the law enforcement representatives, and I would just like to mention some of those. This is to discuss the following, which is inclusive: the LEA's recruitment and retention program, analyzing concerns among LEA administrators, review of LEA procedures and conditions for lateral transfers, and other related concerns as it applies, please, within this arena, because there are certain other senators that have oversight over different jurisdictions, and it's not about your operations, but it's about the law enforcement recruitment and retention and the lateral transfers perspective. We do also have Chief Lizama. Did you want to join us at the table? Because your counterpart is here. If we could go around the table and, well, let me, before I proceed with that, just to notify the public in compliance with the open government law. The initial notification on this particular roundtable discussion was disseminated on the 4th of November, and then the second notice also was shared with the community and the stakeholders on the 9th of November. I'd like to thank our media partners for also releasing information with regards to this particular roundtable discussion and sharing it with the community so that they can either tune in through the televised version or be in the audience as we discuss some of these issues that we'll be proceeding with very shortly. I'd like to thank my colleague, Senator Tom Atta, the Vice Chair of the committee, for joining us this afternoon, Senator Tony Atta, and for joining us, and I believe some of the other senators may be joining us shortly. As we proceed with our discussions, I'd like to go around the table first and allow everyone to identify themselves, identify the agencies that they're representing, and then we can proceed with the discussion. So, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Blas. I'm the Chief Investigator with the Office of the Attorney General of Guam.
Good afternoon. I'm Pedro Leon Guerrero, the Director of Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency.
Afternoon, Senator. My name is Ross Gambler. I'm the Chief of Guam Customs and Quarantine.
Good afternoon, Senator. My name is Vincent Perez. I am an Assistant Chief of Customs.
Good afternoon, Senator. My name is Matthew Sablon, Director of Agriculture.
Good afternoon, Senator. Good afternoon, Senator. My name is Francis Flisco. I am the Testing Supervisor, Department Administration, HR Division, representing my department.
Good afternoon, Senator. Robert Lizama, Director of Parks and Recreation, overseeing the TPPO program.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Joseph Cruz, and I'm the Chief of Police for Guam Police Department.
Thank you, Chief.
Good afternoon, sir. Maurice Sayama, Colonel, Guam Police Department.
Thank you, Colonel.
Good afternoon, Senator. Edward Tovis from the Judiciary, Guam Marshals.
Thanks, Chief.
Good afternoon. I'm John Lizama, the Chief Probation Officer.
Good afternoon, Senator. Carla Borja, Deputy Director, Department of Corrections.
Good afternoon, Senators. Joey Nicholas, Fire Chief, Guam Fire Department.
Thank you very much again, folks, for joining us this afternoon. If there's anyone else in the audience that would like to have a seat and represent your respective agencies, then you're more than welcome to join us up front. We do have a few seats that are still available. To begin the discussions, and Francis, I don't mean to necessarily put you on the spot, but in regards to some of the issues on recruitment, just can you explain DOA's responsibilities as you provide services to the other line agencies, and then we'll go around the table because there are other issues that some of the law enforcement chiefs and administrators would like to share with us.
Okay, so Department Administration responsibilities mainly in terms of recruitment and classification and other matters. Most especially, again, in regards to recruitment, we handle customs, GBD, DOC, to name a few. We basically advertise in terms of making job announcements, conduct testing if required, and basically bring them on board. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Francis. And just for the information, my colleagues, one of the issues among several of the issues that we'll be discussing this afternoon has been really the recruitment and the retention of law enforcement officers at the inception. And then because we are one government family, some of these law enforcement officers choose to apply for positions in other government of Guam entities. And the challenge here is looking forward in terms of trying to establish a policy, whether it be internally amongst the agencies or by law with regards to lateral transfers or the individuals being retained by the respective agencies at least for a reasonable amount of time so that that commitment is there. Let's say, for example, the new cycle where Guam Police Department presently has, I believe, 19 police officer trainees, 20 trainees. Upon the conclusion of the academy and all of the necessary training, and they are sworn in as officers, police officers one, within a certain time frame, there have been many instances in the past, and I'm sure that a number of the administrators here and the chiefs on the table understand this, where in fact they are in the workforce for about a good 6 months, and then they apply for other positions within the government of Guam family. And I'm not looking at imposing unnecessary restrictions, but looking at possibly a commitment on the part of some of these new officers for a limited time, very similar to some of the programs administered at the University of Guam in terms of receiving scholarships, and in turn, you commit to that particular agency for a limited time, and then your options are open. So let me just open the floor for any comments on this particular issue, and I know that it's affected the Guam Police Department Chief tremendously, so please, if we can hear from the department.
Yeah, and if I may, because I think I started the dialogue on this, and I didn't know it's going to include everybody in this, because it was never directed at any particular agency.
No, that's not the intent. And
I just want to make that clear, and I you know, it's I guess a long-standing issue with the Guam Police Department that we've had trainees or people train our department, and our trainings last as long as 9 months at any given time at a minimum. So with that said, a lot of costs go into that. As we know, our department is so undermanned at this point, and with money spent, time spent in training, whether it be the training they receive at the Guam Community College or our enhanced program at the police department, there's really no mechanism in place to, like, and to give an example, like Doc Sanchez as a program that if an individual wanted to go get education and is qualified for that program, for every semester they undergo, they provide a year service. Now, to use that as an indicator that it can be done, I look at it as, you know, for the police department, most specifically because we've always been a victim to those folks that have used us as a stepping stone to get up to whether it be here or to the federal level. And again, we're not here to try to discourage people from going elsewhere, but I think the government of Guam, the police department loses a lot of financial resources we could afford to somebody else, and the brain drain just continues to go, and we never seem to catch up. So that's the main reason I kind of raise this issue with Will, your chief of staff, so we can try to find a way to keep these people from leaving immediately upon receipt of that training.
Yeah, if I could just echo the sentiments of Colonel Sayama. You know, it's just a matter of getting a return on our investment. We spent a lot of time and resources throughout the Guam Police Department to send somebody through training. Like the Colonel had mentioned, you know, in upwards of 8 to 9 months, we're investing in these people, and these are monies that have been appropriated to the Guam Police Department. These are resources that are specific in the Guam Police Department that we invest in. So that we can get that quality officer within our ranks, and only to see that within a relatively short amount of time, we're seeing that these individuals are seeing that it may be a little bit more lucrative to go to another agency, or it may be, you know, for that same amount, not have to go through what we go through, what our officers go through, you know, being a new police officer trainee or a new police officer one out on the road. So they see that. They see that. Even in the reserve program, And we just had an oversight hearing about the reserve program. I know that, and again, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just simply saying that if you look at the Marshal Reserve Program and what they're offering their reservists versus what we offer our reservists based on the law, obviously, I mean, it doesn't take much for one to say, you know, I think I want to go in that direction. So the Colonel talked about a brain drain. I look at it from, you know, just getting a return on our investment, in that if we invest time, money, resource, any kind of allocation, we just like to see a return on our investment.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
Can we get any other comments, please?
We're in the regards to Guam Customs and Quarantine. We're in the same situation as the Guam Police Department, but we're a little bit different. I could count on my hand how many officers that left Guam Customs to go to the police department or even to the fire department. They go to the next level, which is the federal government or to the military. So as we speak right now, I'm going to probably lose another 2 if in this month, going to private agency, private company, and also to the federal government. We're basically the stepping stone for these individuals to go to the next level to get a higher pay, because for a starting salary for a customs and quarantine officer is basically about $11.84, something around that, if you could correct me. But we're basically like what I said, stepping stone for them to move, to progress, or not to progress, just to get a better salary outside the government of Guam. I could count really one hand how many went to Parks and Rec and how many went to the Guam Police Department. I think nobody went to the police department that I know of, and I've been there quite a while for Guam Customs. Fire Department, nobody I think has ever went to the fire department from Customs, except to the airport fire and to Parks and Rec. I think we had 1 or 2 guys that went to Parks and Rec. They came from the Parks and Rec. They went back to Parks and Rec. But we spend money before they're even in training, because we have to work with Department of Administration to get the announcements, to get these things done. It takes 3 months to 4 months to get that listing, the listing to get through the interviews, to get through the physical fitness training. It's not just once they get in, they're getting to get into the cycle, and we get to send them to GCC for another 6 to 7 months, and then they go to our academy. Then from our academy to the OJT. Some guys, some individuals that are in the cycle, a month or even weeks before they graduate, they sign up for the military. I'm not downplaying the military but there's nothing we could do when they start swearing in. Some of them leave a week before graduation. And when they come back, I have to put them back into the agency again and make them finish the cycle when there's only like 2 in the cycle. So we're in the same, I think we're all in the same sentiments that we go through all this. There's a lot of expenditures that we have to, and it's very hard for us to put a contract together to make them sign a contract that they have to be in customs and quarantine for another 5 to 10 years. No one's going to sign that contract. I seriously doubt it. But we have some guys that we train for the K-9 unit. That we spend $40,000 probably for the guy and the dog to go to training for 3-4 months off island. They come back, they resign, and then they take another job if in the federal government. They almost do the same thing and get probably 3 times the salary to my director next to me. So it's not lucrative, basically, to stick around in the local law enforcement when they know there's something out there that they could use the law enforcement community to take it to the next level. I don't blame them, because they just want to have a better life and a better environment for their family. So something has to be done, because we could train. I could have another cycle maybe next year, 30, and we'll probably lose 7 to 8. And that's pretty high, losing when we put a lot of time and effort to get these guys rolling to protect our borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel. Mr. Director.
Senator, I just want to add a little bit on to what the Chief mentioned, but just recently we had a real good young officer who graduated from our last cycle about 2 years ago. He came up and he resigned because he's going to DECA, I guess the Navy commissary or something there. Just recently, good guy, good officer. And, he put his letter in because obviously they had some kind of opportunity there, and he took it. I have to say, hey, good luck, but I didn't want to lose him. I didn't want to lose the guy. But it is a reality. It's a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Leongo. Just a quick question back to the Chief. In regards to the 2 individuals that you may be losing shortly, are both of them initial recruits or recent recruits? within the last
They've been
2,
with
3
the
years?
agency for about 2 years. That was our last cycle, about almost a year and a half ago. So they're still fresh, and actually we spend a lot of money on them, time and effort, from the get-go, from DOA, from the recruitment, and to the graduation and everything else.
We understand. I just wanted to understand the time frame in terms of how long they've been with the department. Vince?
Hey, sir. I'm going to try and make this as short and succinct as I can. I've been with Customs almost 30 years, and within that time, one of the main challenges that we've been facing are shortages. I'm going to give you an example of the last cycle that we just hired. We hired a cycle of 20. They've been out on the line maybe a year and a half, almost 2 years. And you have to understand that it takes months, not just to go to school, but months to bring them up to speed. So we hired 20. Back in 2011, we had 127 officers. We hired 20. But because of resignations and better job opportunities elsewhere, we are at, I believe 128 as of today's date. And we're expected to lose a few more in the next couple months.
More than 2.
Yeah, we're probably going to lose a little bit more than that. One of the things is I want to reiterate the sentiment that we hired these guys. However, they go to other more lucrative jobs within the government of Guam, like the police department, maybe the marshals, maybe somewhere else. But for the most part, we've seen them go to federal jobs like the U.S. CBP. They become ICE agents. They become HSI agents. ATF, and I believe that 1 or 2 of them are in Secret Service or something similar. One of the things that we did in the last few years was we had that law that provided a 40% increase. But prior to that law, we went through the Hay evaluation. My understanding is that in lieu of the Hay evaluation, where it was supposed to equalize the letter grades within similar jobs like officer ones within the police department, customs, et cetera, all they did was, instead of doing that, they said we're going to throw 40%. At the end of the day, what happens is that you threw 40%, but you never equated the jobs of similar types of duties. So at the end of the day, people are looking at that and they're just like, you know what, my job's still, at the lower end. And so when they look at other opportunities, I'm pretty sure that they'll take a chance and they'll go. One of the things, I'm trying to make it as quick. So I'm also a member of the military, and I've moved from the Guam Air National Guard to the Army National Guard. I moved over as an E5, went into the Army as an E5. I didn't lose any pay. The only thing I was required to do was to take the MOS training, but I didn't lose anything. If we can develop some sort of system where if you move into different areas within the law enforcement community, one of the things that we could do is probably it'll be much more attractive if people wanted to move over to, let's say, from customs to GPD or to the fire department. All you do is you take their MOS training or something of that nature. Of course, there will be like some stumbling blocks, but if the military as a institution can do it, and we're actually at a smaller scale, I believe that we can probably work towards that.
A couple of concerns or issues that you brought up, Mr. Major Perez, is first and foremost, these movements does continue to affect, very similar to what the chief said and the director, but you're also recommending that any lateral moves, that the pay be commensurate or that the law enforcement officer does not take a drop in pay. Is that correct?
Well, right now what we're looking at is, yes, we had a 40% increase, right?
Yeah.
Now, that kind of almost brings us up to where we should be at. And I understand here in the government, nobody really is where they're supposed to be. But if you can create a system at least to try and equalize and normalize so that if I move over, I'm going to use the enlisted rank. If I'm an E9 in the government of Guam going over to the police department as an E9, I shouldn't have to. And this is something that happened to me because I've at one time decided I was going to go try something new with the judicial branch. I applied to become a probation officer. What I was told was, well, Mr. Perez, you come over, but you're going to have to take a drop in pay and go down to step 1. And at that time, I think I was like 13, 14 years with customs. So you're kind of like, well, well, that's not going to be beneficial for me, so why would I want to do it? So if we could fix these things, it would go a long way to, I guess rectifying issues. Institutional knowledge, yes, that's another thing. We lose a lot because we invest so much time, energy, educating and training these guys to come in to do the baseline. And then you got to imagine that it's going to take them a few years to hone their skills no matter where they're at. And then for them to come in and work with customs or GPD or wherever for a period of 2 years and then say, you know what, I have a better opportunity elsewhere, and they're welcome to do it. There's nothing that binds them. And we're at a loss because, like I said, 127, 2011, now 128, and then we're going to keep going down. We consistently face these shortfalls. And then we always, we want to hire, 30, sir? Now we can't. So this is where we're at, and we're going to have to make do. I oversee the airport. I oversee the borders. Right now, as it stands, our numbers are for working officers is so low. I'm trying to steal from other divisions to come into my area, and then people wonder why the lines are long in all these different areas, and we try our best, but we need physical bodies is what we need.
Thank you, Major Pierce.
Can I say one thing?
Final comment?
We support a lot of the agencies here, except I think probably just the fire department, but the Guam Police Department, no offense, Chief, but we don't have firemen in our agency. Well, we had a task force, we would, yeah. But during the storms, disasters, or any type of activity, we help the Guam Police Department. They're our brothers and sisters, and of course we have helped probably Parks and Rec and everyone else. But it's very hard. Like I know what this legislature is trying to do. It's very hard to reverse that the role and support Guam Customs, because our work and DOA will come out. Our job specs and everything is totally different from other agencies. So I think that's why we're here, to find out if we could make it something that we could cross the table and be a fireman and cross the table to be a customs officer in time of need, because we do have a reserve program, but our program is so unusual because I can only hire people that are retirees, a customs retiree, and all the retirees that retired in customs are practically, they're not capable of doing the work because of their health condition. And I only have 2 retirees that are doing the work right now, because the law only requires us to hire a retiree back if that individual is covering down for a medical, someone in a long-term medical or deployment. So we have only 2. I can't find 3. I can't find 4, because everyone that retired wants to enjoy their retirement, or they're not capable because of their health condition. So we really don't have a pool to pull. I wish I could say, the Guam Police Department, I need 10 guys tomorrow to cover down the airport. It ain't gonna happen, because our job specs are totally different. And that's why I think we're here, to try to find out if we could unify everything together, and we could jump across the table and help each other out.
Yes.
If I'm correct.
Thank you, Colonel. That's part of the consideration. What it is right now, the lateral transfer issue is certainly a component in terms of trying to get using the Chief's term, return of investment by each of the respective agencies, and then also looking at some of the other policies internally that the law enforcement agencies really should have in place, and that will be coming up in our follow-on conversation. Mr. Director, and then we'll move over to this side of the table. You're done, Pete? Okay. Yes, please, Tony.
Good afternoon. Chief Investigator, Attorney General's Office. I certainly understand and support the retention, especially after each agency pays for training, recruitment of law enforcement officers. The only thing we ask is that because the Attorney General's Office, we get our pool of investigators from experienced investigators from other law enforcement agencies. A minimum of 2 years to 5 years experience is what we're looking for. We want experienced investigators to hit the ground running. And so if there's going to be any restriction internally, internal policy, or any law that restricts the lateral transfer or the hiring of law enforcement agencies, I certainly hope that the Attorney General's Office is exempt from that. We have currently 12 criminal investigators and civil investigators in our office. They're all peace officers. They're all Class 1 post officers, peace officers, like the other law enforcement agencies. And we're looking at probably in the near future of up to maybe 20 investigators total for criminal and civil. And so we're looking at recruiting again from our local population, law enforcement population. So the only thing we ask is that if you can have an internal policy or law, public law, that my office is exempt from that. We need the experienced investigators in our office.
I think you mentioned or you used a particular term, experience.
Yes.
And right now we're still looking at the initial recruitment and retention component.
That's correct.
Let's say within the first 3 to 4 years, so that we can get a return of investment by the respective agencies, rather than, if in fact the Guam Police Department or Customs and Quarantine is going to invest anywhere upwards of $20,000, $30,000, then we need to create a mechanism so that at least these recruits are committed for a limited time frame, whether it's 2 years, no less than 2 years, no less than 3 years, so that the Guam Police Department or some of these other agencies can be assured we will have this entire cycle made in place at least for the foreseeable 2 to 3 years. It's either that or create a mechanism very similar in nature to what is provided with some of the programs at the University of Guam, is where you would return, if not repay, some of the amounts that are invested by your law enforcement agency, so that law enforcement agency can take those resources and apply it towards others. So that's at the get-go, not necessarily with the experience component. If you're looking at anyone who's been in an agency for 5+ years, 10+ years, then right now this discussion is at the initial hiring stage of the retention.
Yes, I understand.
Mr. Chairman, if I can make a comment to that, though. Tony, I can understand where you're coming from. But hypothetically, I have a group of dedicated detectives up in my criminal investigation section, and I'm about to send these guys out to training from the 16th to the 20th. And this is some very high-speed training with NCIS. And if we were to apply that analogy, not just at the entry level, but I have a detective that goes off and gets this kind of training, and then an opportunity goes over, at the AG's office crops up, GPD still loses out. The Guam Police Department still loses out. And I'm looking at getting other kinds of quality training for my seasoned officers as well, because I'm hearing a lot of, the voices are coming from throughout the department, and they're resounding that we need training at that level. So if I get these officers off to CID training, U.S. Army CID training, or the FBI National Academy, hypothetically, or somewhere at IPTM, and they come back, and there's an opening at the AG's office, and I get a detective going in that direction, GPD just lost out on all that. So it's whether it's at the entry level or whether the officers got 20 years of service, as an entity, I go back to that term again. We need to figure out a solution so that we get a return on our investment, because I just lost out on a big chunk of change to get this detective trained, only to go down the street and get paid more or whatever the salary is over at the Attorney General's office. So I think we kind of need to take a look at that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah.
Tony, any final comments, and we'll move on?
Yes, I'm familiar with that training. In fact, I have 4 investigators who are attending that same training. But I certainly understand. I am also a product of Guam Police Department. And I went over to the Attorney General's office. So, but
You want money?
Hence my point, and what I'm trying to bring up.
we understand, but when we look at a pool of investigators, of course, the primary law enforcement is GPD. We also look at other law enforcement agencies here in Guam. However, our office, our investigative unit is such a small unit, and most of the investigators there are career investigators. They're there until they retire, or 90% of them. Otherwise, I don't foresee them moving to another agency. But it's going to be minimal recruitment from other law enforcement agencies. Plus, it's open to other federal and stateside law enforcement agencies. But I would prefer picking up someone with local knowledge and experience. And so this, the only thing is just not complete restriction, but some reasonable time. Because we work together. It's one team for justice. So.
Thank you, Tony. Let's go over this side of the table, Carla, and then Chief Joey.
Yes, sir. I mean, it remains to be said that, very few people want to work at Department of Corrections. I'm not gonna lie. So we're the ultimate stepping stone for all law enforcement agencies on Guam. They're coming in and then they're spreading out. But we just graduated 19 new officers. And initially, for the longest time, Department of Corrections has only had an internal training. It's been 6 weeks or less. I've made it 2.5 months this last time. And with the collaborative help of the Guam Police Department, the Judiciary, and Fire, and Guam Community College. So it's been difficult, at least at the Department of Corrections level, because the officers aren't required to have anything but a high school diploma. And so now the 19 recruits that I recently graduated have college level courses. They have outside training from the other law enforcement agencies. But it's not without being said that we know out of my 19, I think there's 2 or 3 that are waiting for the fire cycle. I'm just saying, just fire. It's okay, it's all right. Chief, it's all right. But we train them nonetheless so that Joey gets the best fire recruits he can when his fire cycle starts. And when we consider recruitment for all law enforcement agencies, I think we also need to consider hiring at DOA. I think DOA, if we want to hire and we want to make the GG1s run faster, because it does take a while to vet the new list, there's always going to be people that want to apply for law enforcement positions in the government of Guam. So right now, our last recruitment, we have about 200 applicants. So in order for us to start with our GG1s that we had outstanding from fiscal year 2015, DOA has to, redo all our GG1s that we all may have had outstanding in fiscal year 2015, but then they have to vet through the various different listings from recruitment. So in thinking how are we going to recruit and how are we going to try and get our cycles done even more quicker, we also need to consider hiring also at DOA, because I know they're just as short staffed when we're all kind of compounding, calling them day by day, getting our GG1s processed. But it's very hard. What I've told my officers is nobody, when you listen to the kindergartners, when they go up to graduation, they all want to grow up and be firefighters and they all want to grow up and be police officers. Nobody sits there and says, I want to grow up and be a corrections officer. It's very hard to recruit, and our job is very tedious. My officers stand around for 12-hour shifts. They're not even entitled to leave the compound for lunch or breaks or, everything is where they're at. They bring their food in. They stay for 12 full hours plus. So my 19 recruits, they're new officers, they already make overtime because we're still not enough. So even with the open vacancies that we have, and then we have new vacancies from the stipulated order that we're going to be creating and filling, we still have the attrition and retirement. So everything, it's just cyclical. And I don't know how anyone from police to fire to customs, I don't know how anyone's going to get to the point where, we're going to be leveled off and we're going to be okay. But it's quite difficult.
Thank you, Ms. Moha. DOA, did you want to respond to any of the questions, the statements were made? Before I recognize Chief Joe.
First, I'd like to thank Carla for putting a plug in for our department. Okay. So basically, what we've heard is part of this possible solution is pay, right? So of course, and I think Major Vince mentioned about the 40%. So that's something to be considered. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned about commitment, looking for some kind of commitment, right? Basically, the DOA is here to support whatever comes out, be it from this panel or what have you. One thing that we'd like to mention is that we don't see, the solution coming out from our rules and regs, but maybe possibly through legislation. So basically, that's what we have to say.
Okay. Thank you, Francis. Let me go over to Chief Joey. He's been waiting very patiently over here. Chief?
It's always a nervous situation when I'm surrounded by a bunch of LE guys. It's usually the long way into becoming a firefighter. But, we've actually discussed this before, Senator, and even with Senator Adat back when he was the oversight chair. It basically costs, at least for the fire service, and I know it's pretty much the same for you guys, about $12,344 a recruit for a 6-month cycle. Now, if you wanted to put a mandatory service obligation on top of that, which is kind of what we're talking about, we talked about the requirement for the employee to pay back depending on when they exit the agency. Now, if I was to do my 5-year math here and carry the one, that basically comes out to $2,468 a year. So if we put a 5-year obligation on these recruits, every year that obligation drops down by $2,468, which is due upon resignation. So they would only pay the difference of, now if there's a lateral transfer between agencies, then it's my belief that the receiving agency should pay the other agency that service obligation, because they're still an employee of the government of Guam. So that's the idea I want to put forward to you as a solution. As far as the lateral transfers, unlike you guys, I mean, the post commission, we came up with the post rules and we set the categories for peace officers, and that was intended to address this type of issue. A police officer 1 should be at the level of a customs officer 1, and so forth. All weapons carrying peace officer category 1, correct? And so the unified pay scale, the wage act and so forth, set those salaries. And if you were to lateral transfer from a police lieutenant to the equivalent of a customs lieutenant, the authority and the responsibility is the same, then the compensation should match that. When you're hiring at a police recruit, fire recruit, customs recruit, and a police lieutenant wants to come over to be a fire recruit, I cannot bring them into as a fire recruit. And the DOA rules and regs does have that lateral transfer within the rules and regs. But it's my belief that the intent was, if a Secretary 2 was moving over to another agency as a Secretary 2, then they keep that salary. But in your case, police officer, or law enforcement officer, and a firefighter are 2 different animals completely. Our cycle, our training, and everything else is different. The only thing we have in common is EVOC, and that's about it. EVOC and incident command, really. So we got to put them. Report writing. So we got to put them through a full cycle. So a police lieutenant is not a firefighter 1, or you know what I mean. So if I was or it's not a fire lieutenant. Let's put it that way. I would have to put them through an entirely different training cycle. I cannot. The police value of that or the value of the training they had in the police cycle is not as valuable, although it is valuable. It's not as valuable as a fire lieutenant. So the lateral transfer doesn't work in that sense for us. And again, it comes back to the post intent. If you're meeting a Category 1 officer in police department, that should match a Category 1 officer in the customs, and that lateral transfer should be relatively simple. DOA does a great job. I'm working with them right now to try to get my fire cycle started. The difference for us is everybody on the island of Guam wants to be a firefighter. So the hiring list, or the applicant list, right, Francis, is huge, over 1,200 the last time, I believe. So it's a big task. So I understand the difficulties. But a combined hiring list for all law enforcement is what I've been trying to ask for, is that, we put out a broad announcement every year for law enforcement, period. And then you just establish a list. We all agree on the type of testing that it requires. They just establish a list, and then whenever any of us agencies need to hire, at least that piece is done. We don't need to do a list for fire, a list for police, a list for customs. So those are my recommendations.
Thank you very much, Chief. Judiciary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that, like the other law enforcement officers, the probation office does have instances, or in the past, where our probation officers have left for CBP, INS, the military, and we're victims just like everybody else. What I will say is that for our recruitment for our entry-level position of a probation officer 1, it is more lucrative than that of a police officer 1 because of the academic requirements. It does require a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. So I will say that in the last 6 months, we did pick up one from the Guam Police Department. She had just completed the recruit cycle. She's an excellent police officer. She's an excellent probation officer. She had a degree. So do we penalize the individual for meeting the academic requirements of the positions? Because it does hamper the department, and it did hamper the department when she left. So, that's one of the things I bring to the table, is that, like the fire chief said, If we standardize what the levels are, the entry levels, a recruitment list that we can all draw upon, but we still have to look at what are the academic requirements for each of the positions to ensure that if you're a police officer one and you were to go to be a customs and quarantine officer one, you meet the qualifications. Unfortunately, for the Department of Corrections and for probation, where the academic requirement is a bachelor's degree, then it's really a promotion for that police officer, the firefighter, the customs officer to be picked up as a probation officer one or a parole officer one, because it does have that academic requirement. So I bring that to the table. One of the things that we do in the judiciary is we do have a policy, and the policy is if we send you the training, if the judiciary sends a probation officer, deputy marshal to training, that's our investment. You owe us if you decide to leave. You can't just go to training and then turn in a letter of resignation and say, okay, I'm not working for you tomorrow because now I'm SRT and I can go work somewhere else. Whatever we invest in the judiciary and the employee, we are going to get that return by having that employee pay that back. Unfortunately, we lose that employee who has gone to the training, and trying to find another training slot will be rather difficult. But if we send you the training, if the judiciary sends you to training, then and you decide to quit, then you will pay that back.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chief Marshal Edward Tovis. That's very, very good ideas. Very good ideas. I like the idea that Joey's talking about. So now that Marshal left to the fire department, he owes me money. I'm part of.
You won't get hired.
I left in '89 as well. I left the police department and well, I wanted Saturdays and Sundays off. That's the main goal for me to leave. But a lot of the problems here, I'm not against the retention. I just feel that it shouldn't be. The lateral transfers. I just feel that it shouldn't be too stringent where it's gonna demotivate somebody from attaining a higher education. I like what the court's doing, where they have us sign a stipulation where if we go to a certain training, then we're gonna pay it if we had to leave. I left the police department in '89, and back then I was just asking Colonel Sayama here, what's the amount that the Guam Police has right now, and it's currently $316. When I left the police department, there was 400 plus, and it just amazes me that up to this date, it's never reached that amount every year since I've been gone. So I don't know, that's something that everyone in this table should start thinking about, and maybe perhaps budgeting, a lot more for more officers for the police department.
Thank you very much, Chief Tovis. Any additional comments, Matt?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I guess I have the most as far as law enforcement. I got 10. And I do have 3 recruits, and thanks for Bill 176. They made a promise. They're going to stay. So, because, actually back 2 years ago, I did lose one recruit to Department of Correction, being that she was offered a permanent job. But that was before. But, I guess it's mechanisms like Bill 176 actually that promotes them to stay at the department. So I only have 10. I don't think I'm going to share my 10 with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob Lizama, DPR Director, acting. And I'm also a product of the Guam Police Department, and I'm one of those that left, but I didn't go to another agency. I went for a political position, of course, but being a SMA, I'm here now at the Department of Parks and Recreation, and thank you, yes, Custom. We were able to at least attain 1, if not 2, officers, and although Matt was saying that he has 10, he's lucky I only have 4. So, with 4 park rangers and a few openings, I'm being challenged, of course, with having to deal with 70 plus parks with 4 officers at the same time, having to deal with all four are all in the same rank, and I wanted to speak with you about this as an oversight to determine how we're able to move forward in trying to attain at least a supervisory level. Of course, we don't hire off the back. It's through Department of Administration that goes through the process, and it requires, of course, a basic certification with the BLEA or the see, in the Guam Police back then there was one right system, and that was one training standards that applied. And then over the years it changed. It was no longer the Criminal Justice Academy, and then it went to BLEA, and then it went to all kinds of other sorts of training certifications. Perhaps maybe that's where the problem is happening. Colonel was one of my students when he was undergoing training in the police academy. So with that standards of training was a very good standard, and it was working for so many years until BLEA came on board. Not to say that BLEA was bad either. But after the BLEA cycle started, apparently I don't think that is recognized now. Now we go into the peace officer standard training. I believe that's happening. There's so many different types of training that created this whole problem about what one right system of training standards needs to be followed. I welcome anyone that wants to come to Parks and Recreation as a TPPO, Territorial Park Patrol Officer. We do need some work out there. The assistance of anyone who wants to come to the park, please come my way with the budget. That's really going to help us out a lot. And they don't barbecue, not at all. But nevertheless, Senator, as the oversight for TPPO, that's something that, of course, I like to address. I know I have one that was a police officer and came over to a park ranger. He actually went up to, I believe, DOC and then came back. So, of course, they're going all around, but somehow they find themselves back to the park ranger, especially now that Bob Lizama's up there.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So let me ask a general question, because in this particular case, I know that Chief Joey had recommended or hinted to a 5-year commitment upon recruitment, and then I anticipate that it would be upon the swearing in of that particular officer or firefighter. What would be the recommendation of the panel members here? Based on your investments, and in this case, Chief, you would like to get a return on your investments, what would be an appropriate timeline in terms of being able to get that individual to commit to serving in that particular agency? And if that individual decides to pursue other opportunities elsewhere, then obviously there will be a payback mechanism. So, yeah. Chief?
Yes, Senator, just real quick, I would just want to add one more thing before I answer that question. That even as difficult it is to keep people, we talked about it here, we're all friends and we all work for the same government, it's a challenge. And then the other part, we had a person who was in the task force for the federal, and while they were in the task force, they got picked up by imagine the task force guy coming asking me, your person now, she applied and now she's with us full time, So, it happens. So now we have to just send people that are above their age bracket to get transferred to the federal. So we solved that issue. But for me, I've always thought about this, what Chief Joy said about the, any kind of obligation. And I've always felt that as long as it's transparent and everybody knows what's going on when they do it, it's fair game. So I'm almost thinking, even in terms of application, before they get selected, to know when they put an application in and they get selected, that's part of their, in my opinion, they sign up that says, not only do I want to be a law enforcement officer, but I also understand that if I get picked up, I'm going to serve 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, at the very beginning, so that they'll decide, well, do I really want to make the obligation, or maybe I'll go to the military, do something else, so at least we know. But I'm hoping that obligation is right in the forefront of before you take the first day at any one of the trainings, not when they graduate, but just to be able to sign that way, we'll know instead of having 800 people apply or 1,000 people, it may be 400, but those are the ones that are committed. They're committed to signing before they even get selected. So they're serious, instead of somebody that says, I'm just going to try to be the, I want to go to the FBI, but I want to start with you and try to convince them, I already got the training or whatever. So I'm hoping that whatever we do, as long as it's transparent and everybody reads it first, nobody's, there's no hidden agenda. I'm hoping that that's fair game, as long as it meets the legal requirements and the attorney says it's good and the lawyer says it's good and everything is good. I'm hoping that's what we'll consider anyway as a consideration.
So going back to the original question in terms of a timeline, is there any additional recommendations? from the members of the panel?
Senator-
Senators, if you want to chime in, please.
Senator, when you swear in for the military, usually you have a contract of like 2 to 6 years.
yes.
So maybe we'll work around those numbers if and how the military works out. When you swear in, you're not going anywhere for 2 years, you know?
Okay.
But another one, Senator,
Yes.
the one thing that officers tend to resign or move on to somewhere else is their retirement program within the government of Guam is not attractive to the officers or the individual to stay within the government of Guam, because the retirement, for them to retire out of the government of Guam, they have to be probably within their 70s or so. It's not attractive like how it was attractive before. So this is something to throw out there, is it's for someone to retain within the government of Guam. A new guy now, the retirement program is not attractive to me. And that's numerous guys that resigned, they said it's not attractive for them to stay in.
That is an issue that the legislature right now is presented with in terms of either a hybrid plan or going the direction of the Social Security option. So I understand that particular aspect. Chief Cruz,
Senator,
any comment on the timeline?
Yes, I was. While I think that the timeline is a good option, I also think that the idea of some type of monetary compensation, like the fire chief is bringing up, is also a viable solution as well. It's something to at least to be considered, because I agree on initial entry. I agree that we need to take a look at a timeline on what the obligatory service should be, and that if we don't do a timeline, then the option should be, as the fire chief had said, well, then if it takes X number of dollars to train this individual, then the idea is that at the end of that training, when they decide to leave, it should be the X number of dollars that should be compensated back to the losing agency. And I think the same concept should be applied to any employee when they accept going off to training. Because take, for example, in the military, if you are a commissioned officer or a senior NCO and you decide you're going to go somewhere and you go off to some training that's 6 months or a year long, when you come back, you just tacked on 2 to 3 years of obligatory service. And that if you decide you want to ETS if you're in the NCO, in the enlisted ranks, or you decide you want to resign your commission if you're an officer, you've just extended that time. And that when you come back from that training, you've tacked that on. So I think those are options that we need to take a look at. So I will tell you that I think a timeline is a good idea. I think financial compensation is a good idea. And I think that no matter where you're at, where the employee is at in their tenure, in their longevity in the agency, that again, you get a return on some kind of investment, and that we look at some kind of financial compensation back to the losing agency. And those are things that I'm willing to sit down with my staff up on my headquarters and try and figure that piece out, because I don't think we'll do it here or get it done here, but I'm willing to sit down with my people and try to figure out from our perspective, from our vantage point, what those options, what will be the better of the options.
And I believe in this particular case, Chief Cruz, perhaps not in reinventing the wheel, there's a policy that already stands in the judiciary with regards to outright compensation or repayment back to the agency. Maybe what you may be able to extend to consider is a timeline associated with that.
Sure.
Yeah. But I know that Chief Marshal Tovish, you had your hand up initially? Okay.
I did.
Chief Lizama?
Yes, I just wanted to add that for the probation officers, with the inclusion of the probation officers in the peace officer standards of training, as far as setting a timeline, we're about 90% done with the duration of the training that's required, and now it's going down to the calculation, what it's going to break down to. So I'm not able to provide a timeline as to how long they need to be retained, but we're certainly looking at that in the judiciary, because it does affect, as with anybody else here, if we're going to invest $6,000, $10,000 in a probation officer because of the academic requirements, then we need to get that return right away, because losing them to CBP, the U.S. Marshals, and another federal agency, it really hurts us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. So we'll go with the part of the suggestion, which is to take a look at the commensurate timelines with the military policy as one. I know that the 5-year timeline was thrown out as another possibility, and then also with a repayback or a payback mechanism associated with that. So So any other comments on that particular issue? I'd like to move on to one other sideline policy that I'd like to pose to all of the law enforcement executives here. Carla?
I think with talking about having them vest 2 to 5 years into the agency once they completed the cycle and having that done up front, I think, especially for the line agencies, I think that's something that maybe DOA can actually put on the application before they sign the application, saying, you know, everything's true and correct and everything on the app, that it could be there once you've completed your basic cycle for whatever agency you applied for. That's right above their signature. So once they've signed, they know already, once they complete that cycle, then they stay. I know for us, I mean, we get them in and then we fill out the rest of the paperwork before we start the cycle at corrections. And then when they come in there, then we can figure out the breakdown and the vetting of how much they'd have to pay to, you know, buy out, if you will, if they're going to another agency. So that also before the cycle starts, so they're also aware that if you're obligated to DOC for 2 to 5 years, whatever the case may be, that you can also buy out if another opportunity presents itself to you and then you want to go to another agency. So still, it's all upfront for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, keep in mind that the understanding here, at least from my perspective, in terms of the option to pay back to that original agency, is so that we don't restrict any individual's opportunity to pursue other possibilities. Is making sure that the agency is able to get some of these resources back. We do have someone in the back raising his hand on this particular issue, but Francis, can I just pose a question to you as to whether, in fact, you would recommend policy, rules and regs, or law as it applies to our law enforcement agencies?
In terms of what's being discussed at this time, in terms of a commitment, we don't see it as being able to be addressed in terms of any policies or rules. So more than likely it would have to be through legislation.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification. Major Pierce? Or Captain Pierce? Sorry, Chief Cruz, I think I promoted it.
Can you turn it on? Just turn it on. We went through this the other night. Okay, yeah, it's good.
Hi, my name is Ray Paris. I'm a captain of the Guam Police Department. You know, a lot of this discussion centers around punitive actions to try and retain people, but one thing I wanted to recommend is that we look at a more positive approach, which is over the course of a 30-year, perhaps 35-year career, we should start looking at how we can implement a time and grade time in service plus requirements with step progression for at least, for the line people, at least 6 ranks. And the reason why I say that is because then over the course of 30 years, our folks can have something to look forward to. It keeps them, number one, kind of keeps their nose clean in a sense, because when you move up to the next rank, you want to keep clean. You want to do the best, you want to perform, and you want to achieve the best that you can. So on the positive side, a little bit more of the reinforcement, a little bit more positive approach to this is to look at a tiered approach for progression and promotion. In our department, we kind of have a problem with that too, because when you look at it, you can take all of the management and supervisory ranks and you kind of contrast that with our PO ranks. And if you cut out the fact that the POTs are just trainees and you really have PO 1s, 2s, and 3s, and then if you take the PO 3s and you realize that they're actually doing sergeant's work, you really only have 2 ranks to progress to, or 1 rank to progress to as a police officer 1. That's PO 2. Because when you go to PO 3 right now, although I'm sure we're going to fix it in the future, really it's a supervisory rank. So we don't have that good stretch of having an incentive. So in other words, what I'm talking about is building incentives into all of the departments where it's appropriate and start looking at how we can do, mandatory movements, or at least, kind of some, we kind of mimic the military in a lot of ways. And so when we start looking at this mandatory progression, if you get to a certain point where you have so many years in service and, you have so many years in a rank, then you start looking at, okay, meet the requirements for the next rank, and you can move up. So over the course of 30 years, perhaps, which is what, that's a career in law enforcement right now, it's roughly about 30 to 35 years, maybe a little bit more. But if you look at that course of progression, it will help keep people in because they're looking at the next thing to do. They're looking at the next rank to step up to. They're looking at what the next rung on the ladder is. So rather than just looking at all the punitive stuff, obviously, it's kind of important to say that you cost me money and I need to get the return of my investment. Yes, that's important. I understand that. But on the other hand, we also want to encourage our folks to actually have something to look forward to and stay with the profession. So I would encourage the legislatures to look at perhaps a professionalism and a career type of statute that maybe implements a requirement for time and grade, time and service, minimum professional development. And, it's just an idea. I just want to toss it out there. And I didn't get a chance to really talk to the chief about this, so I apologize. I don't want to catch him by surprise. But
he wants you to meet him at 0600 at his office tomorrow morning?
Well, he's lived it, so he knows what I'm talking about.
If there are no questions from my colleagues, we're going to transition to another issue which impacted one of your officers, Chief, within the last couple of years, or within the last year. It's just a general question as to whether your agencies have a policy or has a policy on PTSD. I'm seeing some heads nod. So, Chief, please.
Okay, so in the Guam Police Department, at one point, to answer the question up front, Chairman, we do not have a written policy per se. It's something that we're taking a look at, because when we say PTSD at this point, a lot of people have the conception or of the opinion that PTSD is because of something that they endured while they were deployed. While many instances and cases are like that, I will tell you that the Guam Police Department, on a regular basis, because of what our officers are tasked to do out on the road, are subject to a form of PTSD, a level of PTSD. So that's something that we're taking a very close look at, and I've been working with the administration to be able to deal with this. And as you had said recently, we're dealing with this so much so that we have a crisis management team in place right now, where we utilize our chaplain corps, the chaplaincy in the Guam Police Department, of which we have 3, working with social workers from Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center to put this crisis management team together that is on call 24/7. And it doesn't matter what the situation is. It doesn't matter what's going on. If they're dealing with something, they can give us a call, and we'll get them the help they need. But that's something we take a look at, because in the Guam Police Department, we deal with homicides, we deal with traffic crashes, fatalities, we deal with, you name it. I mean, we deal with, so does the fire. I mean, they have to pick up remains and so on and so forth. So when we talk about PTSD, we see it a lot more than what the average person would think of when they say PTSD. Because 9 times out of 10, we're thinking about somebody that was exposed to a combat environment, something they saw that was traumatic, and then they come back and they deal with that. We deal with that on a daily basis in the Guam Police Department, because we see dead bodies on a regular basis. Okay, so that being said, that's what we have in place. At one point, we had a staff psychologist in our ranks. We no longer have a staff psychologist, and it's something that I'm working with a lot of different agencies. I'm working with the administration, and that's something that I think you and I need to have a conversation on to figure that out, to get a staff psychologist on board. Now, I am working with Mr. Ray Vega, the director of the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center. We're coming up with a solution to be able to use the resources they got, and I'm going to have that same kind of conversation with Mr. Joe San Augustine and Carla Bora, because they have similar type of services over there that we may be able to tap on. But up front, we don't have a policy. It's something that we're looking at, because we see the need for that, especially in light of what has happened several months ago. And that's the way we're looking when we go forward with regards to PTSD.
Sir, if I may, and I think because I've spoken to the previous members of the previous legislature, and I think it's something that because of the HIPAA law and people, when we take up the other side of it, the most obvious side, which is the military, because we're all products of the military as well, they come back broken, and because of the HIPAA law, there's certain sensitivity issues that we got to look at. However, I do believe that because of what we do for a living, that sensitivity needs to be addressed, at least with the leadership. Because for me, to have somebody come back from the war and may not be thinking the right way and does not tell us, and now he's carrying a weapon and he's walking the streets, driving the streets around certain things that may trigger that PTSD, I think we're asking for a bigger problem if we don't address it. So those are the things that I feel, because we have those, and we try to keep them in non-law enforcement positions, but we don't have many of those. And eventually, we're going to be at the point where we're going to have too many officers in one corner and not enough on the streets. So those are the things that I feel that I've tried to address with a member of the previous legislature. I haven't seen it happen yet, but I think if that's where you're headed with this, I think it really needs to be looked at, because we're gun-wielding people, and it doesn't take much to trigger PTSD depending on what form you have. And if that is the causation, and they're in the middle of liberation as an example, and it goes off, or wherever they're at, I think the government, the department takes a big liability.
Thank you very much, Colonel. Chief St. Nicholas.
Thank you, Senator. And just like police, fire sees death in many ways. I've seen it in many ways that people should never have to see death. But PTSD is a very serious subject and issue for the fire service. As we speak, and we're working parallel. I think we need to get together and get this to happen together. I believe there should be one overall health and wellness, mental health and wellness program for all of us, not just one agency, not just one physician for GPD, one for us. We need to put it all together into a one complete program under mental health or under public health or some other agency that can handle this, very similar to the Warrior Transition Unit in Hawaii. I currently have not only active firefighters, but I currently have a retired firefighter, just retired recently, and has brought this subject up to me more than once. When they hear a siren go by, they get fugu or something. There's just something that with it. So it's a very serious subject. Thank you for bringing it up towards the front of your issues that you want to tackle. I support it, and whatever you need assistance from us to help push this forward, just let me know. But let's work together, make that happen.
Thank you very much, Chief. Judiciary?
Thank you. While the Judiciary does not have a policy regarding PTSD, we certainly have seen and we've handled it individually. We are very fortunate because we have a client services and family counseling division that has counselors. We work with Guam Behavioral Health, and on an individual basis, we do it not only for the probation officers or the deputy marshals, but we do it for all judiciary employees. We have employees that work in courts and ministerial, in other divisions of the judiciary, and if they were to get deployed and they were to come back, division heads know that if the red flag goes up, if something doesn't seem right, then we need to raise that red flag and speak with the administrator. Once that's done, then we work with our HR, our staff attorney, the administrator, and client services to get that individual help assessed. Maybe it's just a one-on-one counseling, maybe it's a referral to another agency. But then, of course, when they make referrals, we have HIPAA. And that's where, for everyone else, like the chief marshal, sometimes we don't know because the employee may sign a form that says, I don't want to release any information to anybody. But certainly the judiciary has dealt with it on an individual basis, but we don't have something written.
Thank you very much, Chief. Can I hear from DOA, please? I'm sorry, Francis. I know that perhaps these are responses that your administrator, your director should be responding to. I do understand that your administrator had a family emergency he had to tend to, and also your director has a previous scheduled meeting. But yes, in this particular case, because you've heard from some of our law enforcement entities, and I think Chief Cruz is absolutely right. This is not only a situation where our deployed men and women experience or could possibly experience and come back with PTSD, but really because the nature of their work, and also Chief St. Nicholas, the nature of some of the firefighters' work, could lead to perhaps, even if it's short-term, or a situation where our firefighters or our law enforcement officers or GPD officers would need some psychological assistance and support, whether it's short-term or long-term. So from your perspective, would you recommend a policy? It comes back again to the same question. Policy, a law to provide a mechanism so that in fact our men and women who work in these environments, who may be exposed to extreme situations, that they have that opportunity to at least have programs in place?
It probably can be addressed through policy. I think the chief, Joey over there, had a good idea about having those experts such as Guam Behavioral possibly coming up with a policy in terms of working together. Because they all, as everybody has mentioned, everybody has those that have come off from deployment, or even those currently working on the job, such as Chief Cruz had mentioned. One thing that we'd like to mention, though, is not to necessarily focus on those that just coming off deployment, because of like what I believe a gentleman over there mentioned about HIPAA violations. It could be also ADA violations as well. So when a policy is addressed, trying to make it overall, okay? Yeah.
So when you highlighted policy, you're recommending through rules and regulations or by virtue of legislation?
Possibly through legislation, but I think if it could also be, I believe, through policy as well. Working with Aguon Behavioral is because they're the experts. But yeah,
I think what's excellent here is part of the conversation is the chief is willing to continue to reach out to some of the sister government of Guam agencies, and then also likewise with the chief of fire, be able to reach out so that in fact their men and their women can have access to some of these services, because it's not only something that needs to be addressed, and it has to be services that are readily available, so that if any of our law enforcement officers island-wide experience something that they need that additional support, at least they know they have a mechanism in place that they can receive additional support and not necessarily, as a result of their work responsibilities, not necessarily have to own up to any additional cost when in fact they're serving our community. So I appreciate the perspective that has been shared. Yes, Mr. Director?
Yes, Senator. One thing, of course, we don't have the events that happen in GPD and GFD on an everyday basis, that those horrific events that trigger PTSD. But we also, just like the rest of the law enforcement, have a lot of our officers, our National Guard. The deployment goes to on the firing line. So we all know that. The one thing for me though is that when they come back from deployment, like our guys and everybody else, I think PTSD happens. There's no after 30 days it's over from the military side of the house. And I think whatever we do with PTSD, I hope that we tie in or get the military, the federal guys right there with us, because triggers happen after a certain period of time, and so you can't just say, well, they got back 6 months from deployment. That means it's not related to the military, for example, because obviously things happen when they happen. So I'm hoping that whatever the solution is for PTSD, we get the federal government, whether it's Naval Hospital or the military, to be with us on this, because again, you can't there is no cutoff point where after a certain period of time it's government of Guam's problem. Some of these folks go back and forth from deployment, and I think that they're just as responsible to help solve this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. Senator Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just listening to both Francis and Chief Luzama here, and maybe instead of reinventing the wheel again, how the courts does their program as an overall entity, instead of just like Francis was saying, how we don't want to separate and violate any ADA codes or anything like that, and segregating. So maybe with the courts getting together with DOA and establishing this type of policy or what it may be, to ensure that it's available for everyone and not just how we're singling out just for individuals. And I'm not sure how the courts work that.
We can certainly look at it, but one of the key points that hasn't been mentioned yet is the training component for first-line supervisors, managers, and chiefs and directors, because it's not the chiefs. It's not people sitting at the table that are going to be out there in the field when something happens. it's your fellow officers, it's your first line supervisors, it's your Bravo. So they do need training on the signs of PTSD, signs and symptoms of PTSD, so that they can do that, and then it needs to be ongoing. So aside from establishing the policy, there needs to be an ongoing training component to it, so that everybody goes through it when they first go to the recruit cycle, so they know about it if their buddy is not doing too well in the cycle, because it could happen in the cycle as well. Those of us that have been to basic training and AIT and everything else, it has happened at basic and AIT. So from the military standpoint, we got to teach that the recruit cycles. We also have to make sure that our sergeants, our Bravos are aware, our lieutenants, captains, and aboves are aware of some of the signs. And then administratively, what do we do as chiefs and directors to handle it? And we can certainly work with DOA and brainstorm ideas to help resolve this issue.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much, Chief. Chief Cruz, and then
If I could just point out, I think Director Leon Guerrero brings up a good point in that we need to bring the federal government involved in this too. But on our side of the house, in the government of Guam, I think that in addition to getting one of our employees who's currently in the Guard or the Reserve, getting them involved as well, we need to look at the veterans as well. Because I have several of my officers who are no longer part of the National Guard or no longer in the Army Reserve, but yet they may be dealing with something because of a deployment. So they've ETS'd altogether, or whatever the case is. So in that case, I think that it's important that we get Department of Veterans Affairs involved in the conversation as well, so that we can see what options are available for in that regard. Because I mean, they all have veteran status, so we can take a look at that and maybe get them on board in this conversation as well. Because if they try and go back to the Guard or the Reserve and they've ETS completely, or they've retired, they're going to say you're not in the rank and file anymore. You're retired, or you've just ETS'd altogether. Then we need to take a look at what are some of those options as well.
yes, absolutely. I mean, it's got to be a concerted effort on the part of all the stakeholders and all the entities out there. And this is not, in terms of the discussion of a policy for PTSD, it's not to override or set aside the responsibility of DOD as well as the federal government in taking care of the men and women in uniform once they return, and if in fact they have that diagnosis. The idea here is to ensure that there's a consistent policy across the board that not only allows for recognition of symptoms of PTSD, so that you, Chief, and some of the other administrators here can make that decision, whether in fact you would pull that individual aside, reassign that individual, pull the gun away, at least for an interim time frame when that individual is evaluated, because we certainly don't want to see a situation occur unnecessarily when it could have been prevented. And this is where we're trying to work on a policy that would be consistent, that would provide some of the additional training that has been recommended to first-line supervisors as well as the administrators and managers, and then proceed forward in terms of empowering and providing a mechanism so that in fact these law enforcement officers can use some of these services if in fact they need to avail of it. So any final comments on this? Yes, Carla.
I know that the Department of Corrections, under the stipulated order for the court, recently contracted another clinical psychologist. And as we grow our mental health unit within our medical ward, one of the things we made sure to put in our contract with our psychologist was that not only is the person supposed to do our psych evals for our recruits, but they also need to respond to the needs of the officers. So that person, of course, is hired for our clientele, our inmates and detainees, but that person also responds to the needs of our officers in the events like we've had recently with the suicide, with the death of an inmate. So they're able to respond as our team grows, our mental health team grows. We have a social worker, and then we also have our clinical psychologist. So that's part of what the clinical psychologist's contract entails, is responding to the needs of the clientele and also of the staff at the department.
I understand, Ms. Borja, that in your particular case you're adhering to the requirements of the stipulated order, and just looking at the judiciary, they have a mechanism in place. It's in-house. You're establishing or reestablishing a mechanism that will take care of all of your personnel.
Yes.
I think we need to also recognize that there are other law enforcement agencies that, whether it's through the support of DOC or another mechanism is established that would be able to allow for other law enforcement officers to take advantage of that. So I appreciate your comments, because certainly you're another resource, at least for the immediate future, that
Yes.
could possibly be available to some of our men and women in uniform. So, folks, if there's no other final comments on, yes, Chief, I'm sorry, Chief Marshal?
I've actually had an experience with that as far as one of the personnel, but I'm not going to discuss that. And, what a reasonable manager would do is, of course, the safety of everyone, and probably disarm. If this becomes long-term, I'd like to add that if a PTSD issue of a returning soldier becomes long-term, everyone needs to know that there's federal prohibitors for an individual to bear a firearm, and I don't think law enforcement is exempt from that. If somebody has a long-term mental disability, then that becomes a federal prohibitor of that individual bearing a firearm. So that needs to be also considered.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tobis. Any final comments? If not, folks, thank you very much. Any follow-up on our conversation as it applies to recruitment, retention, and lateral transfers, or on PTSD policies will be circulated if by any chance we were able to formulate a policy so that we can get your input. Thank you very much, folks. Have a good evening. Thanks, Chief.